me know when you're ready. Let's start the live stream.
Okay, so
Mr.
everyone
Stewart
just needs to
has
go on.
been omitted.
Oh, here's Stuart now.
Stuart, yeah, Stuart, can you hear me now? Well, you could hear me before.
I can hear you.
Okay, we are live. We may need to just have you, Stuart, as a your voice as opposed to being able to see you because we have started the live stream. So let's keep going and we will commence. So welcome to this virtual hearing for the inquiry into the health and wellbeing of kangaroos and other macropods. This is the third hearing for this inquiry, which is examining a range of issues related to the health and wellbeing of kangaroos and other macropod populations, including the impact on kangaroo populations of commercial and non-commercial killing of kangaroos and government policies and programs related to kangaroo management. Before I commence, I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land from which I and many of us join this meeting today. I also acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands from which all meeting participants join us today. I pay my respect to the elders past, present and emerging and extend that respect to all Aboriginal people watching. Today's hearing will be the first ever fully virtual hearing by this committee. Holding this hearing virtually enables the work of the committee to continue during the COVID-19 pandemic without compromising the health and safety of members, witnesses and staff. As we break new ground with the technology, I'd ask for everyone's patience through any technical difficulties we may encounter today. If participants lose their internet connection and are disconnected from the virtual hearing, they're asked to rejoin the hearing by using the same link as provided by the committee secretariat. Today, we will hear from representatives of the Department of Planning, Industry and Environment and from 3 scientists whose work has informed the department's kangaroo management program. Before we commence, I'd like to make some brief comments about the procedures for today's hearing. There may be some questions that a witness could only answer if they had more time or with certain documents to hand. In these circumstances, witnesses are advised that they can take a question on notice. The committee requests that answers to questions on notice from this hearing are provided within 14 days of receipt of the transcript. Today's proceedings are being recorded and a transcript will be placed on the committee's website once it becomes available. Finally, a few notes on virtual hearing etiquette to minimise disruptions and assist our Hansard reporters. Can I please ask committee members to clearly identify who questions are directed to, and could I ask everyone to please state their name when they begin speaking? Could everyone please mute their microphones when they're not speaking? That's a really important one. And please remember to turn your microphones back on when you're getting ready to speak. If you start speaking while muted, please start your question or answer again so it can be recorded in the transcript. Members and witnesses, please avoid speaking over each other so we can all be heard clearly. Also, to assist Hansard, may I remind members and witnesses to speak directly into the microphone and avoid making comment when your head is turned away. So I now welcome our first witnesses. First, Ms. Malloy and Mr. Brill. You do not need to be sworn in as you have already been sworn in during a previous hearing for this inquiry. Therefore, could I start with Dr. Steve McLeod? So could you please state your full name and position title and swear either an oath or an affirmation from the cards that have been emailed to you by the Secretariat?
Yes, my name is Dr. Stephen Rory McLeod. I'm a Senior Research Scientist for the Department of Primary Industries.
Thank you.
My affirmation, I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much. Now we'll move to you, Dr. Stuart Cairns. Could you please state your full name and position title and swear either an oath or an affirmation?
My name is Stuart Charles Cairns. I'm an adjunct lecturer at the University of New England, but I'm operating in capacity as a private consultant with relation to the kangaroo surveys. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cairns. Okay, now with everybody sworn in, Ms. Malloy, would you like to start by making a short opening statement, and please keep it to no more than a few minutes if you can.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Ms. Faehrmann. So I'd just like to thank the committee for inviting us to give further evidence today, in addition to the evidence presented in the last hearing, and also the substantial additional information provided to the committee in the form of supplementary answers to supplementary questions and questions unnoticed. We understand today that the committee is interested in collecting additional information on kangaroo populations, biology, harvest quotas, and survey methodologies used by the department. We really appreciate being able to bring our scientific experts along today to assist the committee and provide additional information, and I'd like to sort of personally thank them for doing that to support us. In addition, I'd like to sort of reiterate some of the points, and I'll do that as succinctly as possible, that I made previously about how we manage and regulate the commercial kangaroo management programme in New South Wales. I'd also like to just remind the committee that the original submission we made and provided to the committee was a whole of government response that was supported by the Department of Regional New South Wales, including our colleagues in DPI and Local Land Services. I won't go into as much detail as I did in my opening statement at the previous hearing, but I previously mentioned we operate under an extensive legislative framework that's not only New South Wales legislation, the Biodiversity Conservation Act, but also the Commonwealth Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act in terms of the approval of our commercial kangaroo harvest management plan. You'll also be acutely aware of the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act, which is the primary piece of legislating protecting animals from cruelty in New South Wales, and that also applies to kangaroos. And the New South Wales Police Force monitor and investigate breaches under the New South Wales Firearms Act. So there's quite a few pieces of legislation that we have to adhere to and respect as part of our management of the programme. In addition to the legislation, we've also got quite a lot of codes, plans, guidelines, including the National Code of Practice for Humane Shooting of Kangaroos and Wallabies for Commercial Purposes, which was updated in 2020. And in addition to that, internally in the department, there are annual quota reports, commercial harvest quotas, minimum quotas are set at 15%. There are a lot of different codes, guidelines and rules that support us. In addition, the kangaroo management programme is managed with the assistance of some really good governance. The department convenes the Kangaroo Management Advisory Panel, which provides advice on the operation of the commercial end of the kangaroo management programme, and that includes nominated representatives from industry, animal welfare interest groups, Aboriginal communities, farmers, scientific community and government. We also engage with the kangaroo industry by maintaining regular comms with the Kangaroo Industries Association of Australia. Our team are supported by the broader Environment, Energy and Science leadership team in terms of decision making around planning and policy settings. And we also take part in the Kangaroo Management Task Force, which is a collaborative group of industry, community and government bodies led by New South Wales Local Land Services. We have a very modern and up-to-date compliance programme, which includes compliance policy and framework, prosecution guidelines. We have a very strong relationship with our regulatory partners, including New South Wales Food Authority, Department of Primary Industries Gaming Licence Unit, the New South Wales Police, and also interstate agencies where they come into play. And we have a range of tools at our disposal. Education warning letters, which we use regularly, penalty infringement notices, and where necessary, prosecution. We also undertake opportunistic, random and targeted inspections of carcasses, harvesters, chiller premises and processing works. Most of you are aware then we have a number of macropod species that are actually listed as threatened, and they're dealt with through our Saving Our Species programme. Good example of that will be brush-tailed rock wallabies. Just a few comments in closing. We constantly proactively seek and apply the best available science to improve our management approach and outcomes. We're committed to using adaptive management combined with monitoring, evaluation and reporting to support continuous improvement of the on-ground management decisions and improve capacity for data management and reporting for ecological, social and economic outcomes. In conclusion, we operate a program that has been around for decades and base our decisions on robust science and data. It's a program focused, as I said, on continuous improvement and the principles of ecologically sustainable development. So thank you very much for the opportunity to make that opening statement on behalf of my colleagues.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Malloy. And I just wanted to thank all the witnesses again for agreeing to appear today at what was reasonably short notice. We'll go to Mr. Mark Pearson for first questions, the Deputy Chair.
Thank you very much. I'll put this question to Ms. Malloy and Mr. Brill because you were here at the last hearings. So on the last occasion, you all took various questions on notice and you have since provided further material and are answering further questions today. Have you provided all that you are able to provide in response to the issues that you took on notice?
Mr. Pearson, to the best of my knowledge, I think we addressed the questions as well as we could. If you feel there are gaps or we could expand, obviously there was quite a few questions. I can't remember the exact number, which is perfectly fine. And we did our best to answer them in as much detail as possible without sort of creating volumes of material. Where possible, we also added relevant scientific papers and citations. Obviously, there's a lot of information contained in them that we could draw out. So if you feel there are any gaps in that information, we can expand. But we were trying to be succinct, but also give you as much information as was required to answer the question.
Okay, so you gave us as
Mr.
much
Brill?
information as required. So we can we not, therefore proceed and report on the basis that for any unanswered question or request for information, you have no answer or information or no additional answer or information. That's correct?
There could be some additional answers or information that the other witnesses have, potentially. I don't know. Mr. Brill, do you want to add anything to that, or?
No. Look, I agree with my executive director that we provided thorough answers to those questions. We believe we provided thorough answers to those questions. But of course, if you think there are bits that are not answered, then you know, there's an opportunity now and
Yes. Okay.
Well,
thank you,
this
Mr.
to
Brill.
come back to us.
Yeah, well, thank you, Mr. Brill. So, because my next question is actually for you. On the last occasion, you at page 26 in the transcript, you testified that you, quote, disagreed with the premise, unquote, that kangaroo populations can only increase by a maximum reproduction rate of 10%. You said that you, quote, would like to see the calculations and figures, unquote. So since so testifying, have you examined the figures and calculations?
Yes.
And so you have examined them, have you?
Yes.
Okay. And has that been of the contrary side of the science that actually underpins that estimate of 10%?
Yes. The calculations and assumptions that were provided that the 10% is based on is contrary to the science.
Okay, so you disagree with the 10%, but you do accept that in setting the cull quotas, a relevant factor would be the biological capacity of a kangaroo population to regenerate. Would that not need to be taken into account? In
setting the quota, we need to take account of what the populations are. That's correct, and that's how the quotas are set. We survey populations based on the surveyed population. We set quotas.
But so you're saying you set quotas on surveying a population, but you don't take into account the relevant factor, which is the biological capacity of a kangaroo to regenerate. You say you don't take that into account?
The population survey, because you're surveying the population itself, you've already taken into account the capacity for it to have regenerated in the previous period of time between the previous two surveys.
Okay, so you disagree that the maximum population growth is only 9 or 10%, which is based
Absolutely.
on a great deal of science. Okay, so you disagree
I
with that.
absolutely disagree with that.
Okay, so if you disagree with that, which is accepted by a large majority of ecologists, etc., you still have the aspirational harvest rate of 15 to 17% as being sustainable. So an extra, in your calculations of quotas, it's looking at 15, it states, and I think you refer to this, that there is actually a 15 or 17% increase in regeneration in kangaroo mobs. That's your finding, isn't it?
The science has established that a 15% in eastern grey, western grey and wallaroo species is a sustainable harvest level, and 17% for red kangaroos is a sustainable harvest level. We can draw on scientists that we have with us that can give a much more thorough answer as to why those and how those levels are set, and why the 10% is not correct.
Let's do that then, if we can. If we could, Dr. McLeod, I think you raised your hand to respond.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd just like to address the 10% as being a maximum rate in terms of the rate of increase. That is incorrect. There is substantial empirical evidence from a large number of studies that has shown that the maximum rate of increase of many kangaroo populations and over a range of species is substantially higher than that.
Can I jump in just to clarify something with this? Just to clarify, when we did hear that the other at the previous hearing, that was in reference to greys, I understand. So the 10% is because grey kangaroos, I understand, is that 12-month gestation period, if you like, whereas some are potentially others 8 to 9 months, which gets you to the potential 14, 15%. So just to clarify, that the evidence that we did hear was greys. So continue.
Yes, thank you. You're quite correct. There is a difference in the duration of pouch life between greys and red kangaroos. That's not the only thing that's affecting the rate of increase here. There were a number of assumptions in the calculations that were presented at the last inquiry, the testimony let's say, assuming that the maximum rate of survival of pouch young was quite low at 30% is incorrect. It can be, and it ranges dramatically depending on what the conditions are. But under good conditions, pouch survival can approach 80 or 90% under some good conditions, and that's why we see spectacular rates of increase in under some conditions. That's not to say that pouch. That's not to say it's not variable. It is. It can be quite variable. But if looking at all the assumptions that were underpinning those calculations, a number of them can be disputed in terms of there being the maximum rates for the population. If we go back to what Mr. Pearson brought up before in terms of the maximum rates, the quota itself is based on a survey of the population size, but that is not what determines the harvest strategy. The harvest strategy is based on the population dynamics, and the population dynamics are related to the sustainability of the harvest, which is tested against use the rate of increase of the population, uses a tracking strategy which takes into account changes in the population size, change in the harvest rate, which tracks populations in the population size. This strategy is used around the world in variable environments and is shown to be quite a safe in terms of reducing the risk of overharvest, a safe harvesting strategy. And on top of that, an additional level of safety is including the threshold, which is now used around Australia, not just in New South Wales, but in all commercial harvests of kangaroos around Australia.
So could I ask a
Okay, I
further
might
question?
just So maybe if this could be your last one, just before we throw to other members, Mark, we can come back to you
Sure.
if necessary, but it's, time is pretty quickly.
It goes directly to the evidence just given. Is there a reason why your department does not take into account the lower confidence level and the upper confidence level of 1.96% when calculating the quotas? And this is a methodology which is used all over the world and is used at CITES to determine whale numbers and therefore bring about a ban. It's a factor which we can't see in your data and methodology. Do you understand what I mean by this lower confidence level and the upper confidence level that's adopted pretty much by about 50 countries, which I have in front of me, including CITES, but it is not adopted in your methodology?
Mark, just to be clear, who are you directing your question to?
So the question will actually address, I think I'll direct that question to Mr. Brill.
I think it's much better answered by Mr. McLeod.
Okay, Mr. McLeod.
The harvest strategy itself is based on an estimate of the population size, and that estimate includes a variance, which is the 95. Well, in this case, you're talking about a 95% confidence interval, but it doesn't affect the point estimate of what the estimated population size is. It's just an estimate of how much variance they think, or how much confidence we have in that estimate at that particular time. If you could be a bit clearer, give me a bit more detail as to how that's used in other harvests around the world, that might help answer the question.
It is the methodology which has been adopted wherever there is an exploitation of wildlife in many areas of the world. And if we look at the quotas estimates or population estimates. So, for example, in 2018, when there was a population estimate done at 4 million, if you had taken into account the lower confidence level measurement and the upper confidence level, the lower confidence level would have been extinction, according to this international practice of using the lower confidence level and upper confidence level. So because your department is not applying this methodology, internationally recognized methodology, to err on the side of caution, to protect animals that would otherwise be harmed in breach of law, if that was applied to your own calculations in 2018, a quota for kangaroos or wallaroos would have been at the lower confidence level of extinction. And the world practice, so if CITES was to be asked about this, they would say you cannot have a quota because if you do, it could cause extinction. That is the importance of this methodology, which you're not applying. Is that correct?
I think I'm getting a better understanding of your question. What I would ask you to do is, would you be able to provide those calculations? Because I have a very good knowledge of the harvesting literature, and I'm not aware of the calculations that you're citing. But what I think you're referring to is the confidence interval, or the basing of the threshold and how that's calculated. So in the answers to supplementary questions that I've read in response to the submission by DPIE, the calculation of the thresholds there was a mistake made in the calculations in those. We didn't make a mistake. It was the response to our questions. There was a mistake, and it comes about because the application or calculating the 95% confidence intervals, or the Z scores we referred to for setting the thresholds, is based upon a normal distribution. If the population is not normally distributed, then you can't accurately calculate that.
Okay, we might. Yeah, sorry. Can you just this one sentence? Can you wrap up, please, Mr. McLeod? I'm just really conscious that we have Dr. Cairns here for just another 30 minutes.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Is actually The data needs to be transformed before that calculation is made, and that would calculate it correctly. What's happened is that there's a mistake in those calculations that were in response to our answers, and that needs to be corrected. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I might just move to a few questions that I have. I just wanted to go back to, firstly, I think Mr. McLeod, you said potentially a 90%, like some good years, there could be a 90% survival rate in joey. So I've seen a few different literature on this now, and I think I've seen something which is a maximum of, say, 73%. Maybe Arnold has said juvenile mortality is 73%. But I think the supplementary questions that the department has responded to, I believe quoted banks maybe as the 50% mortality as a result of foxes. And I do understand that foxes are pretty rampant throughout most of regional New South Wales. So I just wanted to maybe go to you, Dr. Cairns, firstly with that figure of the 90%, where the 90% of joeys survive. Is that an average year?
I think, Madam Chair, that would be a very good year. Pouch young survival is generally quite good, in my opinion, certainly with red kangaroos. That I've been working on red kangaroos in South Australia for a number of years. Where mortality is more likely to be high is in that first year of being independent in the 1 to 2 year age class.
Oh, sorry, I was the first one to speak with the mute on. The 50% figure that Banks quotes then in terms of juvenile mortality, yes, that is still that is still what you use to determine the biological rate, though. Like, I think we're being a bit pedantic here, aren't we? That's what that figure is. The juvenile mortality, 50% of young will not survive to become adult kangaroos.
Well, again, that would depend upon conditions. I mean, most of these animals are they live in an energy-rich world, but a protein-poor world. And if conditions are good and they require protein to grow, they'll grow and survive. The level of predation in a lot of these areas is fairly low now because of the heavy baiting that goes on for foxes and dingoes.
Okay, can we run with that then? Say it is the 90% of juveniles survive. That is still, what kind of roughly would that be in terms of reproduction rate? We're probably getting, say it was 10%. I mean, we might be getting up to say 25%. If 90% of joeys survive. Can I just get your response, Dr. Cairns, to the 426% increase? I think you probably would have seen the transcripts of this if you did some research for today, which I'm sure you did, that the 426% increase in eastern greys in the Tibooburra region, which we asked a lot of questions about last hearing, which was between, and I don't have the, yes, change from 2014 to 2015 was 426%. So what do you say to that level of increase for eastern greys?
In the Tibooburra zone, I would think that that's probably got a substantial amount of that's to do with movement. I mean, you've got to remember with eastern grey kangaroos that the first record of eastern grey kangaroos west of the Darling River was in 1972. So prior to that, there were effectively no eastern grey kangaroos in that rangelands country west of the Darling River. But with changes in pastoral practices, particularly putting in lots of watering points, it's created an environment that suits eastern grey kangaroos. I mean, I've heard anecdotally, if you get dropped into the rangelands anywhere, you'd be no more than 5 kilometres from a watering point, which for a kangaroo is not far. Those eastern grey kangaroos in the Tibooburra zone, they move in, and then a drought will correct the edge of their range and their distribution, and they'll be eliminated. Once conditions improve, they'll move back in again. And I think I'd have to defer to Steve on this one. He does the surveys in those areas. He might like to add something.
Okay, Mr. McLeod, if you could just come in here as well. Although I have got a number of lots of research that suggests that in fact eastern greys are sedentary, really, aren't they? They don't really roam far beyond 5 to 10 kilometres. Please, that's the science, isn't it, Mr. McLeod?
I think there's there is some evidence that they are sedentary, but it tends to be in a cohort that are adults, and most of the studies that we've done have not looked at large-scale movements, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that the technology hasn't been widely available or cheap enough to use on a broad scale, and the other one is that most of the studies have been done by PhD or master's students who have a very short time to do their work, and so they've specifically selected animals that they thought would not leave the study site because they were using technology that they had to track down on the ground. So they used VHF collars, which have a very short range. So our studies on the movement tended to be biased by, in terms of home range, tended to be biased by those studies, our understanding of that. However, if we look at large-scale aerial survey data, and this has been done in South Australia. There's one particular study that was led by Dr. Popel, who'll be talking later today. They actually tracked much greater movement, and that included western grey kangaroos, mainly red kangaroos, but also western grey kangaroos, which were again thought to be much more sedentary. And those movements were much greater than we had thought before. And what you've identified is we really have a knowledge gap here. We really need to understand the movement of kangaroos through the environment a little bit more, where we think we know what's going on in most cases, but there are still things that we need to learn, and this is one of them. This is a good example.
Okay, well, it also sounds like if you don't have as much evidence that they're migratory, maybe they're not migrating, and you need to have a look at the way you're surveying in the figures potentially, because this 425% figure just hasn't been able to be justified yet. So Penny, I'll throw to questions from the opposition. Ms. Penny Sharp.
Thanks very much. Thanks for coming on here. I note that none of us are scientists, but we are working through this very carefully. And I just wanted to, I suppose I wanted to ask the question, which is really, I think, where some of these issues are coming from, which is that there is concern within the community and from some scientific people that we've had advice, have given evidence to the committee, and I'm assuming that you've seen most of that, that the way that we're doing these calculations, whether it's the reproductive rate, whether it's the correction factors, whether it's the discussion around survival rates, the fundamental question to me seems to be, are kangaroos in danger as a result of our actions because somehow the use of these figures is masking their decline? I don't know who is the right person to answer this, and I'm happy for anyone to jump in, and I defer to your expertise. But there's, we've got a lot of claims and counterclaims around the figures. Clearly, we've got a framework about how we manage commercial and non-commercial populations of kangaroos. So I really just want to give you the opportunity to explain to us, the concerns about masking decline and why you do not believe these are an issue.
Okay, who'd like to handle that one? Dr. Cairns, maybe, because you're with us.
I think with kangaroos in Eastern Australia, there have been three major climatic events which have done a lot to shape the populations. And they were the 1982-83 drought, the millennial drought, and this most recent drought in 2017 to 2019. Apart from in between those droughts, kangaroo numbers have increased quite substantially. I think the harvest in lots of ways has very little impact on kangaroo numbers.
Right, and so your view, I mean, in terms of the frameworks that you're operating around calculating quotas and such, you believe that obviously the drought has the biggest impact, and I think that that's very clear. And we've also heard a lot of evidence around sort of boom and bust populations as a result of that. But the concern from the community that are we endangering kangaroos is clearly not your view. Is that right?
Certainly.
And can someone take on the issue? There's been a lot of backwards and forwards around correction factors. Can someone, for people like me who are not across the maths of all of this, can someone take us through that and again explain the differences? Because again, we've had a lot of toing and froing on this issue.
Which differences are you seeking to get explained?
Good question. Good question. Well, I mean, essentially, we've received evidence that the correction factors, you know, are adding in different areas that haven't been included before. I mean, can I just say I don't pretend to understand all of that, which is why I'm really asking you is to explain A, how the correction factors are applied, and B, why they've changed over time, because there is significant concern about that issue.
Well, correction factors are to deal with the issues of citability. That if you're looking in a survey strip and you're travelling at, particularly with helicopter surveys, you're travelling at 90 kilometres an hour, detectability of objects like kangaroos declines as you look further away from the survey platform. And that's why they've been developed. And this is why there's been a move to use distance sampling, because with distance sampling, you can actually model detectability. And I think Steve.
Sorry, Dr. Cairns, could you just explain to me distance surveys, how they work?
Well, essentially what you're doing is you're measuring the distance of the object you see from the aircraft. And eventually when you collect enough data, you can then model the declining citability. And once you've got that, you can work out a probability of detecting an animal in a nominal survey strip.
And is there work being done? I mean, look, you know, the counting methodology is argued, it doesn't matter what sort of animals it is. It's, you know, a significant issue. Have you, sorry, this is actually off the correction factors, but while we've got you, drones and the use of drones.
Actually, Penny, can I jump in just because just to delve a bit deeper on what the survey methods that was Dr. Cairns, was just referring to. You've increased those survey transects though, is that right? You were starting, I thought at one point you had 200 metres, then you went to 100 metre for more accuracy. And I think at the last hearing we heard you're now up to 300 metres. Why the difference in the transects over time?
That's with the fixed wing surveys in the inland parts of New South Wales. And I think Steve, who's involved in those surveys, should respond to that, but I can comment on the helicopter surveys in the tablelands. We use a 150 metre wide strip, and I'd be quite happy to go back to a 100 metre wide strip, because when you look through the results, the detections, you're picking up less than 10% of the animals, fewer than 10% of the animals you see are in that last section of the strip, which is the 100 to 150 metre section of the strip. The great majority of detections are within 100 metres of the aircraft. And if you parse it further, the overall majority of them, or the substantial proportion of them, are within the first 70 metres, 40 metres of the aircraft.
Can I just ask a question on that?
Can I just, sorry, I'll just see if Mr. McLeod, I'm conscious I've jumped into Penny's question time. So Mr. McLeod, did you have something to say on that transect as well? Why the change?
So there is as research has been done, and we've improved the methods, we've been looking at improving the precision and accuracy of the counts themselves. And that's the initial reason changing from a 200 metre strip to a 100 metre strip didn't have such a great difference on the actual estimate, that it had a big impact on the precision of the count. Moving again to using distance sampling, which is with a change from 100 metres to 300 metres, gave a great gain again. And so basically this comes about because as statistical methods have evolved and become available, and new methods of collecting data become available, we adopt them into the program. And the idea of there is that it produces more accurate counts, so the quotas can be set more accurately. And that's the reason.
I just have one
Sorry,
question on this,
sorry,
please.
everybody, can I just wait? Just sorry. Now, Mark, you had a specific question on this, is that correct? And Catherine, you did, and Penny, I'm sorry, you have time to ask several questions after this, but just to pick this out, if that's okay, because it's a critical issue. So we'll go to Mark very quickly, and then Catherine.
So, Dr. Cairns, you obviously made it very clear that the methodologies that have been used to calculate, to produce the population estimates have changed continuously. And if that's the case, how is it possible to justify how long-term trends and quotas can be reliably set across time, given that different methodologies have been used? So we've had no period of time where that same methodology has been used to calculate the quota over a period of 2 or 3 years. Surely that is much closer to an accurate assessment rather than having various methodologies.
Thanks, Mark.
Will I proceed or?
Yes, Doctor.
Yes. Yeah, I think that Steve's right, that the methods have evolved and become better. But I can comment on the shift from a 200 metre to a 100 metre strip, which I was involved in the research that affected that. There are always available conversion ratios that you could either convert the 100 metre estimates to 200 metre strip estimates or vice versa. And that would allow you to have continuity in your data estimates. And I presume that Steve might be able to comment on the conversion between the distance sampling fixed wing surveys and the 100 metre strips, which have dovetailed into one another.
Okay, we'll go to you, please, Mr. McLeod, then Ms. Cusack.
Thank you. Yes, it's in the same way that the research had been done looking at the calibration of a 200 metre strip to the 100 metre strip so that you can directly compare the results from a 200 metre strip to a 100 metre strip. We've done the same work with moving from a 100 metre strip to distance sampling. In the last evidence that Mr. Brill presented, said that they didn't run concurrently with the survey, and that's true, they didn't run concurrently with the large-scale survey, but we did research work at a research station owned by the University of New South Wales, and over 2 weeks of testing the counters, we compared both the methods. The analysis of that has been done to a preliminary stage, and we're very confident that there's a substantial improvement in the accuracy and precision of going to using distance sampling, or in particular microcapture distance sampling, as opposed to the 100 metre strips. But we also have the data to recalibrate what the 100 metre strips were. So we do have continuity in the time series. And I'd just like to point out that over nearly 35 years, there's been 3 changes in methods. It doesn't change rapidly. The last change only occurred relatively recently to microcapture distance sampling, but that's only because those methods have been developed to the stage where they're sophisticated and refined enough to us to use in an operational way, not just in research.
Okay, we'll go to you, Ms. Cusack.
Yes, my
Directly
question is
on this.
simply, how many kangaroos do you actually see versus what the methodology tells you is the kangaroo population? Can you just give us some indication from the raw data how many kangaroos are actually observed? And then, so trying to get a feeling for what is the size of the number of what's actually seen versus what that then extrapolates into the size of that number.
Okay, now who would like, Dr. Cairns?
Oh, well, if you look at the probabilities of detections, you're only detecting probably 30% of what's present as you pass them on the strip. So if you produce an estimate of 3,000 kangaroos, you've probably only seen 1,000 or fewer. There's an example that's been kicked around with wallaroos in the northern tablelands where one of the protagonists or antagonists concerned about this have raised the point that 508 sightings of wallaroos was able to be converted into I think it was 30,000 or sorry, more than that.
No, it was almost 300,000.
Yeah, almost 300,000 animals. And that's easy to do because you can use that 508 observed animals to produce a density estimate, which takes into account siteability, the area surveyed, and the factor that we incorporate into Wallaroo estimates of 1.85, a multiplier of 1.85, because it's been demonstrated that they still have an overall flat siteability problem. Once you multiply that up by the 40-odd thousand square kilometres of the survey blocks, you get your 300,000 animals. You're mute.
I guess the point is that
That's-
if you have such large multipliers, it only requires a small change in what's observed to lead to a radical change in the population estimate.
Well, proportionally, the change is still the same.
Thank you.
Okay.
Steve,
we might just go.
to comment on this.
Yeah, just quickly, Mr. McLeod, if you have
I
something to
just
contribute.
if I just add the difference of going from strip sampling, which was the older methods, to distance sampling has changed the method of analysis substantially. I think the question that you were talking to before was really relevant to strip sampling. It's not so relevant to distance sampling because of the method that's used to estimate what the population size is. It doesn't depend on sampling large areas. It's really more dependent upon constructing a detection function and how much variability there is between the transects that are surveyed. From there, it can be done very accurately, and this is actually measured within the analysis itself. The precision of the analysis or the estimate can be actually calculated. So we can be quite confident that the numbers using distance sampling methods are very close to what we're seeing.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Sharp, we'll go to you now if you're ready to recommence. Thank you. Sorry, Penny, mute.
Gotcha, sorry. I'm happy for Mr. Pearson to jump in if he wants to at this point.
Okay, so we'll go to Mr. Pearson. I also have a couple of questions as well, if I can as well. So, Mark.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Cairns. So just while you're here, because I know you're leaving shortly, in your professional opinion, should the DPIE reports be subject to the rigour of the peer review process?
Well, I would have thought not, because they have been peer reviewed in the past, and I did some work on horses for DPIE, and those reports were peer reviewed. In fact, they were sent overseas to be peer reviewed, and the methodologies are similar, and they got.
But the methodologies are changing and constantly changing.
No, methodologies at the moment are similar. The method that I'm involved in which is used to count kangaroos, is the same one that's used to count horses in the Alpine National Parks.
But there's been no internal or external audit of your work since the horses.
No. Sorry. Yes, there were two reports were peer reviewed in probably 2009, 2010, and were found to have no problems. And I presume that DPIE or OEH, as it was then, felt that if the methods weren't changing and they considered I was an honest trader in this area, they wouldn't bother with peer reviews again.
But the methodology has changed, Dr. Cairns.
Not from what I do for the tableland surveys.
But you just explained that sometimes there's a 100-metre view and then a 200-metre view, etc., etc. So these are changes.
That's for the inland. That's for the pastoral division surveys. That's for the fixed wing aircraft surveys. Helicopter surveys on the tablelands, which I'm involved with, have not changed in terms of their execution since their inception, which is in 2003.
Isn't that a concern?
In what
if there's
way?
been no audit, no peer review, considering the controversial nature of
It's not a concern of mine, but if people want to have my reports peer reviewed, I'm quite happy to have that done. First,
Can I just jump in there with this as well? I've just
5 agencies.
very sorry I spoke over you, but I just might jump in with a question on this as well, because some of the areas that you survey, if we go to your the Northern Tablelands, you do that every year, is that correct, Dr.
No,
Cairns?
every 3 years. The Tablelands, there's a survey of the Tablelands every year, but you start, the Northern Tablelands was done in 2019, for instance. Central Tablelands done in 2020, and there'll be a survey starting in early September on the Southern Highlands and Southern Tablelands. So it's in a 3-year rotation through those tableland zones.
Okay, and so do the transects that you use, for example, do they stay exactly the same in size? So, for example, the area that you survey each time?
No, I change it. I change it based on information from the previous survey. So we've got information on previous survey effort, which is transect length flown, the precision of the estimate we obtained, and the new surveys are reset to a target precision of 20%.
Okay, do you increase, so does the area that you survey increase then?
Sometimes it increases, sometimes it decreases. It depends on how precise the previous estimates were, which gives us a bit of flexibility. And the surveys are redesigned, so the same survey transects aren't flown, but they're redesigned and tested with simulations as to what sort of coverage they'll give.
Can I just jump in just in terms of, we'll go back to you in a sec, Mark, just about you were talking about the whole kind of boom and bust thing, if you like, for well, the whole industry. But I just wanted to check, so why therefore in really significant periods of drought, so let's say for populations, I think I've actually got this from the quota report where it says, I think it's the May 2018, just before the aerial surveys being conducted across the Western Plains, New South Wales was experiencing widespread agronomic drought conditions, and that as of the 31st of May 2018, 99% of the state was covered by one of the 3 drought categories. So why then, with this boom and bust, why do so many licenses continue to be issued, or quotas set, I should say, when it's clear that the whole state is in drought and the population is going to go through the floor? Dr. Can?
Well, I'm not sure I'm the person to ask about setting quotas, but I've never had a problem with harvesting kangaroos as the populations move into drought, because generally I see the harvest mortality as being compensatory. It's often removing animals from the population that would perish anyway. I mean, the impact of drought in the inland areas is really quite savage compared to the tableland zones. I thought the last drought, which was now thought to be perhaps a worse drought than the Federation drought, had little impact in the northern tablelands of New South Wales. But as you move further south, the impact became greater. And certainly as you move from the west into the inland, it was really quite savage.
So, Dr. Cairns, the harvesting of kangaroos would be taking out healthy kangaroos. They wouldn't be wanting to take out emaciated, burnt or harmed kangaroos, would they?
They take out kangaroos. It depends on the strategy of the field processor.
But if it's a commercial harvest, as opposed to a mitigation killing, then surely the shooter, the harvester, would only want to take a kangaroo for which he would be paid.
Most shooters would shoot for body size, but it depends on the density of the population. I mean, I did some work years ago in the northwest of the South Australian pastoral zone, where shooters would shoot anything that moved because the density of the populations was so low. And really, it was almost an uneconomical activity.
But the shooters are choosing animals for which they will be able to hang in the chiller and be paid. They're not going to be taking out, or they're not going to be euthanizing animals that are suffering. That would be correct, wouldn't it?
Well, the conventional thinking on kangaroos and individual responses to drought is that the large animals succumb to drought fairly quickly, and so do the very small animals. So often after a drought, you've got a population with a biased sex ratio, biased towards females, and most of your survivors have been females of prime reproductive age. This is why you can get quite substantial increases following a drought.
Can I jump in as well? Just wanting to get a sense of, at the last hearing, we asked questions around the overall population number of kangaroos, but within that population, within the, I think every year the department issues a table which has how the various populations are going, but it didn't seem to add in different areas or zones, if you like, or take into account the fact that different zones had been added to increase overall the areas that were. So, for example, Northern Tablelands was added in 1991. Southeast New South Wales was added in 2004, and the Central Tablelands was added in 2008. I just wanted to get your sense, firstly, Dr. Cairns, is that correct?
As far as I know, because surveys, first surveys were done in the Southern Tablelands in 2004, I think, 2003. The same as the first surveys done in the Northern Tablelands, and the Central Tablelands first surveys weren't done until 2008. So prior to that, I guess quotas in those areas were always set in relation to some ground surveys that had been done mainly in the Northern Tablelands.
That artificially
In fact,
inflates the populations, though, doesn't it? For the fact that, yes,
I was just going to
if
say,
you have new zones added, sorry, you go.
The new zones were added as harvest zones. Prior to that, there was no harvesting in those areas.
Dr. McLeod might have a comment.
Yes, Dr. McLeod, sorry.
Thank you. If I could just add, the overall picture that's not how quotas are allocated. Looking at the overall population, summing all those areas together is not how the quota is allocated. The quota is allocated on a zone by zone basis. And so the population is calculated within each zone, and each zone is managed separately from other zones. So even though and you're quite correct, that graph has included new figures, so it's misleading in that sense. It should be calculated on density rather than abundance. That graph itself has no relationship to the setting of the quotas because they're managed on a much smaller scale on a zone by zone basis. So I guess what you were talking about there doesn't apply to the management of zones itself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, just as you're responding to that, I will we'll pause there. Thank you, and we'll say thank you to Dr. Stuart Cairns, unless there's any burning questions from the Secretariat, which I'm sure there's many, but time has beaten us. So Dr. Cairns, thank you very much for appearing.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
At today's hearing. Thank you very much, and we will now swap witnesses.
Thank you, Stuart.
Thanks, Terry. I'll talk to you later.
No worries.
Thanks very much, Stuart.
Thank you. Okay, now we have Dr. Popel, who is with us. I think Dr. Tony Popel has joined. Yes, there you are. Welcome, Dr. Popel. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can. You can hear me?
Yeah, we can. Perfect. Excellent. That's very smooth. Okay, we'll just begin by swearing you in, if we can, Dr. Popel. So if you could please state your name and position title and swear either an oath or an affirmation. I understand the Secretariat has emailed those to you.
Yes, sure. My name's Anthony Popel, but you can please call me Tony. And today I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And I assume there's no opportunity for an opening statement, if that's okay. You haven't prepared one. I'm just checking.
No, I haven't prepared a statement.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, that's good. That's perfectly. That's how it should roll. So we might just continue our questioning. So I will go back to the Deputy Chair, Mr. Mark Pearson, for further questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Purple, for coming. In 1997, you authored a paper titled Comparison of Helicopter Line Transects and Walk Line Transects for Estimating Densities of Kangaroos, undertaking comparisons at 5 sites, all in Queensland during winter, summer and autumn. That's correct, isn't it?
Yes, that
Okay.
sounds correct.
Yeah, and you stated in that report sample size of at least 60 to 80 single animal sightings per transect. Sorry, you stated a sample size of 60 to 80 sightings for adequate estimation of density where sample sizes fall below the value. Some caution is needed in interpreting the results. Yet the wallaroo sightings are as low as 54 wallaroos across 37 transects, and that's from the design and analysis of helicopter surveys, etc. How then can you determine the population estimates are accurate when your own data contradicts your statement?
Just trying to remember that study, which was some time ago, but
it's what everybody relies on, and including in an article in work that was done by both yourself, Dr. Cairns, and Dr. McLeod, always relies on this particular finding of yours, and yet it doesn't seem to be being applied to prevent harm to the wallaroos.
The 60 to 80 number, it refers to number of clusters of animals, not actually individual animals. It's a rule of thumb.
What is a cluster of animals?
So what's a cluster? Sorry, I missed that.
Is it a mob or is it a single animal? One would assume in the science a sighting is a single animal.
It's a sighting object, and it doesn't matter whether it's kangaroos, whether it's duck nests, whether it's a pod of dolphins. It's a sighting object. It's what you see.
Obviously you're counting because you're saying 60 to 80 sightings, and surely for the purpose of robust science, we need to know how many are in that sighting, whether it be 4 in a cluster, 100 in a cluster, or 1.
Yes, of course, but it's the 60 to 80 refers to the number of clusters that you see when you're doing a survey, and it's a rule of thumb because it's to enable good modelling of the detection probability. And so if you don't have 60 to 80, I mean, really, the more the merrier. If you could have 100, 200, that would be even better. Likely to be better, but 50, 30, 40, you know, that could work. You need to have a look at the data. It would depend.
So it's all very grey and vague. So you undertook a study where 922 female red kangaroos with joeys were shot at locations all across Australia as an experiment to see the extent to which reproductive success increases with age. However, prior to 2011, there was extensive literature clearly already demonstrating what the reproductive success increases with age were. So could you please statistically justify how killing 922 does with their joeys, which would mean probably up to 1,844 animals across the entire country, is a reflective sample?
Sorry, I just missed the start to that question there. You're referring to a study published when? This was looking at the determinants of reproductive success in female kangaroos.
Yeah, and so it involved killing 922 does, female kangaroos, and their joeys. It could have been one or two per. And so I'm just wondering, what is statistically justify how this was done across an entire country as a reflective of example? So what proportion of the entire group or mob did each of the 922 make up to determine how reflective they were for the area?
Look, again, from memory of that study, it was taken on, the samples were taken from a number of sites in Queensland and New South Wales. They were, we were interested in whether, let's see, whether, let's see, seasonal conditions affected affected reproductive output, and there were other factors such as maternal age. Sorry, I'm just trying to remember, trying to think of your question. Exactly, what are you after there?
Well, Dr. Pope, you're involved in an experiment which killed probably 1,844 animals. Did you get an ethics approval for that? Do you remember?
Tony,
yes,
don't
there would have
forget
been
you
an
can take
ethics
it on
clearance
notice.
for the animal.
Point of order, can I just interrupt there? I mean, the inquiries about how we do kangaroo management in New South Wales, I don't think asking about experiments undertaken by someone, by a witness that has nothing to do with this, and asking about ethics approval is in order.
And Tony, don't
Okay.
forget you can take it on notice.
Yeah, take
Right,
it
excuse
on
me.
notice.
Order. Can I just, yes, can I also just remind all members that we do and should treat witnesses with respect at all times, although witnesses can expect robust questioning. But yes, if members can please treat witnesses with respect. And yes, Dr. Popel, answers can be questions can be taken on notice. That is also our witness's prerogative. Continue, please.
Okay, I won't press any questions.
If you could please provide your question again. It wasn't clear to me just exactly what you're asking. There was you did ask me about ethics clearance. There was certainly ethics clearance.
Can I just interrupt there and suggest that Mr. Pearson has said he's not going to pursue that line of questioning at this point. So, Mr. Pearson, you've still got the questions. If you could ask a new question, please.
So basically, I just wanted to understand how that experiment involving those number of animals across Australia has helped determine calculating population numbers in New South Wales, if at all.
I don't think it's relevant to estimating population numbers in New South Wales.
But it was related to understanding production rates, correct?
It was addressing questions on reproductive output in kangaroos. There were some questions had been raised that previously by others, and we addressed those questions. But I'm not sure. It was to do with. I'm trying to remember the exact questions. I mean, I could take it on notice, but I'm still not sure whether it's. I don't think it's terribly relevant to the questions that you have at hand here.
Okay, if we might just go to Ms. Sharp for questions. We'll come back to you, Mr. Pearson, and we'll go to other committee members who have questions as well. Questions from the opposition, Ms. Penny Sharp.
Thank you. I think this question is to Ms. Malloy. I'll start with you, Ms. Malloy. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of discussion about methodology and science, and I accept that that changes over time. My question to you really is, I mean, the department talks a lot and about using the best science. Are there things that we could be doing, in your view, that we're not, and what are they, and what would you like to do? So, and is it an issue of resourcing?
I'll answer the last bit first. It's not an issue of resourcing. So we do have a small team, but they're an expert team with a lot of experience, led by Terry, and also the director. Sonia Arrington is the substantive holder of that director also. So Sonia's got a lot of experience managing the program, as does Terry and his small team. You can also see that we've got access to quite a considerable amount of expertise, not only the scientists here, but also the sort of broader breadth of ecological scientists and zoologists and botanists, etc., within the environment and energy and science portfolio. I think we operate really well from an adaptive management point of view. We are cognizant of how things are changing out there on the ground, particularly during the drought. We are cognizant of climate change and the changes that will have in terms of not only kangaroos, but lots of other species that we looked after, including those that are threatened. And I think we already operate within, as I mentioned earlier, tight legislative framework, really good compliance, good policy, good governance. There's always things we can do better and more efficiently, but we're constantly on the lookout for that in terms of that continuous improvement. And I apply that to all of the programs that I manage, be it environmental water, saving our species, the coast flood estuary stuff. We are constantly striving for excellence in terms of how we deliver for the New South Wales government. So, and we're constantly doing that. Can we do more? Potentially, yes. But we're
Sorry,
constantly
can I just jump in there?
Yeah.
I mean, look,
Yeah.
I expect you to obviously be very, please, obviously defend the amount of resourcing you've got. I would make an aside that Saving Our Species has just had $5 million at least a year cut from it, but that's not what we're talking about today. My question, if I can just press you a little bit more, which is in terms, with the research that's there, I mean, obviously this committee's seen a lot of evidence that tries to, that basically, presents alternative facts, I suppose I would call that. I mean, I'm just trying to get a sense of how comfortable you are that that New South Wales is using the best science, and are there things that we are missing? One of the examples I would just use is drone technology, for example. Was it just, and maybe some of the other scientists here can answer that question. I mean, what in your view is missing from the way in which we're trying to make these, what everyone accepts are quite difficult calculations?
Yeah, look, from my perspective, we're using the best available information we've got. And I know in the previous two hearings, there was a lot of evidence provided that may offer a counter view on how we can do things. We have subsequently provided an incredible amount of evidence and advice that supports what we do. And we're very grateful today to be able to sort of bring that to you in terms of the personnel that support us in that scientific information. But just in terms of the drone technology, I might, given that we have got the scientists here with us, I might get either Terry or maybe Stephen to, or even Tony to comment on that aspect specifically, Ms. Sharp, if that's okay with you.
Yeah. If I comment first, and then I'll pass over to Steve, if that's okay, Madam Chair, for some more detail about autonomous drone technology. First of all, of course, we're always looking for better ways to do things, and of course that involves money. So if there was more resources to do further research and things like that, things could be more refined. There's no question about that, and that probably applies in every industry and every field of science. Drones certainly appear to a layperson to be a bit of a goose that laid the, not the goose, appear to be the golden egg, if you like, that we're all chasing. But conducting drone surveys on a statewide basis it doesn't even fit within Australian aviation law at the moment. So there's a lot of policy and a lot of technology to be developed before, and law change before that can ever become a reality. So yes, we're very keen to pursue that and other improvements, but it's a fair way down the track for us in the case of drones. Steve, do you want to add on the technical? Because I know you.
Sorry, can I just say I accept that. It's just that people keep raising it with us, and I do think that the explanation of why it's difficult, particularly in some large place like New South Wales, is important. I don't need to know the technical details. I suppose where my questioning for Ms. Malloy was about, well, the science is ever evolving, the techniques are evolving, and look, that I'm fine with that. I actually just wanted to ask. I've just got a couple more questions, if that's okay, Cate. Which is actually moving to the animal welfare aspect of this rather than the toing and froing on the reproductive rates and those kind of things. I mean, I think there is significant evidence of real problems with the way that either the culling, where culling is done, or with and I think less so in the commercial harvesting field. What action, given the reports of the terrible animal welfare outcomes, particularly in the non-commercial field, what action is actually being undertaken to manage this? And I'm not quite sure who to direct that to. I don't know whether it's to you, Mr. Brill, or whether it's to Ms. Malloy.
So I'm happy to speak to the commercial sector and the measures that take place in that sector. But anything in the non-commercial sector and non-commercial cull, I think we've agreed we'll take on notice because we don't have the right people here.
No, and just to be clear, who are the right people for that? That's National Parks, isn't it?
Yeah, National
Correct.
Parks and Wildlife Service look after non-commercial culling, which is essentially wrapped up in their wildlife licensing. So yeah,
yes,
we can take those on notice.
Yes, I think you'll have to, just because I actually, the evidence that this committee had, which is pretty compelling to me, is that I think that there are real issues there, and would like to know, what action is being undertaken. I mean, I've previously asked questions about this. My general view is that there is not enough people on the ground in national parks to actually do monitoring compliance. It's a ticker box exercise that I think is very problematic. That's a very long way of saying we don't have them here today, but if you could take on notice just exactly what actions they're taking, particularly given if they've looked at the evidence that's been provided to this committee off the back of that, that would be appreciated. And Mr. Brill, back to you. Thank you.
So in terms of the commercial harvest, firstly, the National Code of Practice is developed, was reviewed in 2020 by a field of experts, and that defines a benchmark, if you like, that professional harvesters can follow. Includes things like firearm caliber, projectile weights, things that quite a lot of detail that assures humane harvesting, humane shooting. That's then enforced through rigorous license conditions that all of the harvesters and in fact dealers are subject to. It's relevant to the dealers because there's a requirement on dealers to report any evidence they see or that comes through their processing works of non-headshot, or if you like, body shot carcasses that are evidence it's not evidence of not complying with the code, because an accidental body shot is possible, albeit rare in the field. But the license forbids them to possess or sell those. So the code requires them to quickly euthanize any animals that are not shot with a single clean headshot, and then the monitoring process and also our inspection process of chillers ensures that that we have a really good handle on the incidence of that in the field.
Thanks for that. Thanks for that, Mr.
Yep.
Riddle. And we have actually had evidence of that before, so I don't need you to take me through all of that.
Okay.
I suppose the one question arising from that, though, is it seems to me that the commercial harvesting obviously has far clearer guidelines, and I know I'm going back to my other question, but Ms. Malloy, is there a recognition within the department of the differences between the animal welfare outcomes that are occurring on the commercial versus non-commercial? And has there been any discussion / committees or work undertaken to try and improve that?
So I can only comment from our perspective managing the commercial end of the business. So I think I'll have to, whether there's been any committees set up between non-commercial and commercial, I'm not aware of. I know there's constant conversations between ourselves as a leadership team within EES across parks and our directorate on many different issues. So I'll have to take the specifics of that on notice, because I would like to sort of collaborate with my parks colleagues on the response so I get it accurate. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. We'll go to questions from Mr. Pearson again.
Thank you very much. I'll put my question to you, Mr. Brill. When you say that compliance is being able to be adhered to in terms of animal welfare at the chiller, and when the carcass arrives at the chiller, it has no head. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah. Is anybody on the field checking and inspecting as to what actually happens at the point of kill? Does anybody go out onto the field meeting shooters and having a look at what they're doing and the standard? Because it's clear we don't know whether there's been a clean head shot. There could be a jaw shot, a neck shot, an eye shot, and then basically because the head is removed and it can be cut down low through the neck if there are neck shots. Is there anybody who goes out on the field and inspects at the point of kill?
We traditionally did that in the past, yes, but due to safety reasons, and you would probably be aware of events of the last several years, or several years ago when one of my dear colleagues lost his life to a firearms incident. We don't go out with shooters at night and inspect those. We do inspect in the chillers, and you can determine more. Well, you can determine things regarding neck shots and things like that. But I guess you're right. I guess there is a little bit of scope for interpretation, or a scope for error. But I will say, these shooters are highly professional. They don't miss. I've been out with shooters before that took. I said, "How many are we? What's a load? 40 kangaroos. How many bullets you got? 40. There was no more, no less. Every night, come home with 40. These guys don't miss very often.
But it would be a shame, though, wouldn't it, if the 40th kangaroo wasn't shot cleanly and we needed a coup de grace shot? That'd be a bit of a problem, wouldn't it? I just want to raise with you too. We asked the Kangaroo Industry Association of Australia, do they calculate how many joeys are killed during commercial harvesting? And they said no, that your department should have that number. So do you have the number of joeys that have been killed in the last year, both joey in pouch and joey at foot, which may have fled? Do we have any figures for those animals?
No, we don't collect that information.
Okay. So we have these ghost animals. We don't know anything about them, and they're being killed as a consequence of the commercial.
Mr. Pearson, ghost is your term, not mine. I'm not sure how that's useful, but no, the answer to your question is no, we don't collect that
Okay,
data.
so basically what ghost
Okay.
means is we know what...
If this is your last question,
about-
Mark, if you could
Sure.
just put the question, please, and then I've got
What's the
questions
last
too.
question?
Thank you.
So,
In a non-pejorative way, if you can do it.
so we know about the carcass that's arrived in the chiller and mostly what's possibly happened to it in terms of animal welfare, but we don't know about any of the joeys that have been impacted upon by the commercial kill. Is that correct?
Yes, we do. Absolutely, we do. The harvesters abide by a code of practice. The code of practice sets out in very clear detail how that action is to be taken. So we know in the vast majority of cases, that's exactly what happens. No, we don't. You're quite right. We don't know how many. We don't collect that data. But we do know what happens. We have a code of practice that is very, very comprehensive. It is best available science. It was reviewed in 2020 by experts in the animal welfare field. You know, to make assumptions that this is all bad, I think is completely wrong.
Mr. Brill,
I'll just jump in now, Mr. Pearson. Mr. Pearson. I was just going to continue on that actually, if I can. I haven't asked questions this round, but I just wanted to check with you, Mr. Brill. So you said there's a code of conduct, but just to be clear, you also said, was it the compliance officers code of practice? Thank you. We have a code of conduct as MPs. Code of practice is essentially there, but the compliance officers, you have said, don't go out at night now. Is that correct, to accompany shoots?
Correct. Due to personal safety for the compliance officers themselves, they no longer go with the shooters at night.
When did that commence?
It stopped after the death of our dear colleague, Mr. Turner.
And so what, sorry, that was a few years ago now, which was
2014.
We understand what that was about, which wasn't on a kangaroo shoot at night. That was a different issue.
Correct.
Okay, so I just wanted to go to the issue of the new kangaroo management plan, which I think is, where is it? Yeah, the draft kangaroo harvest management plan 2022 to 2026. And I've got the graph here that's in that draft plan that we're all very familiar with, that shows the fluctuation in kangaroo populations over certain time. So that goes back to, I think, what you all talk about, which is the 40 years of data, and goes back to 1975 and right up here until 2021. And it kind of takes us through the classic boom bust cycles that you've all referred to, according to largely the weather patterns at the time. You just wanted to check you're familiar with what I'm talking about in terms of that graph.
Yeah, I am.
Yeah, okay. So I might just start with you, Mr. Brill. So when I have been looking at this graph, just to verify, if you like, and have a look at the increase in population numbers, say if we go to what was really the last rainy period of 2010, 2011, the wet years, if you like. This graph says that wet years continued, I think, into 2012 and 2013. It said that it was a wet year as well in 2013. I just wanted to query that, because I have in front of me the Australian rainfall deciles from 1st of January to 31st of December for 2013, which actually suggest that the vast and overwhelming majority of of New South Wales received very much below average, or the lowest on record, or below average or average rainfall. So I just wanted to query, because we have had quite a few people kind of raise this with us about the boom and bust cycle that fits in apparently with the wet years. But according to your very own graph that is contained within the plan that is before the minister to sign off on, one of the years that you suggest is a wet year is actually a dry year. Are you aware of that contention?
I'll point out that is also marked as a dry year, so indicating that some areas of the state were better than others. So some areas of the state were quite dry, and some of the areas of the state were not so dry. So in 2013 and 14 are marked both wet and dry in that graph. And I think that's quite plausible. It's exactly what Dr. Cairns told us about regarding the last drought in the Northern Tablelands. In some areas, they're affected much more than other areas.
But in 2013, there certainly was some pretty severe coming into 2014, particularly. So I think the government had started, spending money on drought. There was no wet in 2013 and no wet in 2014, according to these, particularly west of the very east. There is no wet in 2014. That's there, and I'm sure you'd be aware of this, Mr. Brill. That is the Bureau of Meteorology for New South Wales for the entire 2013 year. It was not a wet year. So why in the graph that is going, and that has always been relied upon to justify and demonstrate the boom bust cycle, why is there a year in here that says it was a wet year, but it's actually a dry year, according to the Bureau of Meteorology for New South Wales?
Look, I'm happy to take the data you've spoken about on notice and respond, but the comment I will make is that you can take the wet and dries out of that picture, and the boom bust cycle speaks for itself.
How is that then?
Well, you don't need the markings to say which ones were dry and which ones were wet to see the population responses up and down. It's quite clear. I will say right up front that that this graph was raised in the last hearing, and we did agree in the last hearing that that it does contain some small additions of zones, and possibly it's going to be your next question, given your nodding of your head. It does contain some small additions of zones that aren't standardized for, and the correct way to draw that zone, that graph, as Dr. McLeod pointed out a little while ago, is to draw it on a density basis. And I will undertake to do that before this is resubmitted to the Commonwealth for consideration.
Thank you, because it just does go to the heart of this, if you like, because we have heard from the department in terms of the estimates of or the justification for the increases in some ways of kangaroo populations is because of this boom bust and because of wet years. And yes, we can see the increase in the graph in what appears to be a wet year, and it's like, oh yes, that's what happens, the wet and dry, that's what happens. But if you delve a little bit deeper, that's a year of drought. So actually, how is the rate of the population of kangaroos increasing so much when we have heard from witnesses, including yourself, Mr. Brill, that during the drought is when they plummet so much in terms of their numbers? Because we're asking about the numbers that have decreased, potentially by shooting, but you say no, that's because of drought.
I'll go to
how
Dr.
is it increasing so much during a year of drought?
Sorry, I'll go to Dr. McLeod in a moment, but kangaroos respond to feed availability. They don't respond to rainfall. If you had a kangaroo in a pen and you fed it lucerne hay, it will respond, okay, regardless of the rain. And I'm not trying to teach you to suck eggs. So what I'm saying is it's the feed availability that grows in response to the rain that can hang on after rain stops and kangaroos can still continue to reproduce or grow after the rain stops if the feed continues to be there. Steve, do you want to add a comment?
Can I also just say, in terms of that pasture, though, that in early 2014, farmers were shooting their stock. There was such little feed. Mr. McLeod?
Yes, if I could just add that, as Sarah is pointing out, he's quite right. It's a succession of good years can grow a base of food. Kangaroos could still have a positive rate of increase, even though there might be a rainfall deficit. How difference between a wet year and a dry year and here, and how the measurement of drought and the definition of drought becomes important here. And there certainly will be situations where some areas would be in drought and others wouldn't be. But that doesn't stop kangaroos from moving away from the dry areas to areas of more forage, which is something that was experienced by many graziers in Western New South Wales during the last drought. There were pockets of very high densities of kangaroos, large areas with very few kangaroos in them as well. We see that in the data. We see that in the aerial survey data. We also see that in the time series within a zone. Just having a simple definition of drought or dry as opposed to wet, it doesn't really help us trying to understand the population dynamics of kangaroos, because as Terry said, they're not driven by rainfall itself, they're driven by a response in vegetation to rainfall. And I'd also like to point out that, could I just be very quick?
Sure.
Is
Yes.
the boom and bust nature of kangaroo populations is beyond dispute. Every ecologist who's worked on kangaroo populations understands that they do go through this cycle, and it's typical of animals, particularly herbivores, in variable environments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McLeod. Can I just one more thing in relation to this graph then? It does have that if we go to that 2000 and 2001, and again, this graph that we kind of all, well, you rely on, and is once again in the new draft kangaroo harvest management plan, why doesn't it seem to account for the fact that the correction factors and the whole methodology changed in 2000 and 2001? It basically, like, that graph doesn't seem to account for that. Is that correct as well? And it doesn't account for the additional harvest areas.
I agree with the not accounting for the additional harvest areas. I mean, it does account for the population in the additional harvest areas, but I agree it doesn't standardise for those, and therefore, from that perspective, it could be misleading. Over the long period of time, however, they are quite small. But I've undertaken to create that graph on a average density basis, and that will standardise for those additional areas. In terms of the change in survey methodology, the graph does document that change in survey methodology. Right down the bottom, it has a dotted line and it has a grey line and a legend underneath that actually says what the survey methodology was in those times. Yes, it's true that we could apply some correction factors to adjust populations up and down. And Steve or Dr. McLeod or Dr. Popel could talk to that a lot more. I actually personally think it's better that the estimates are shown as they are calculated with a documentation of what the methodology is, so that the reader can make their own interpretations of that issue.
Yes.
Perhaps you could show both. That's another alternative.
Could I just jump in there? Because it does say between 2000 and 2001 in every single quota report. When you look at this, when you look at the estimates, it says invalid comparison due to a change in correction factors and survey strip width. So the comparison is not valid, but it appears in these graphs as though it is. It's just all the counts have continued. It's a natural rate of increase, if you like, according to your boom and bust cycle. But back in 2000, 2001, it's a complete. There's several factors here that I'm just pointing out, that the chart that you've been relying on for 40 years, that you once again submit to the department, once again, just seems to be unreliable. And this is after you were stressing the best methodology and the best science, but you're here admitting that these few things that I've pointed out are, in fact, you have to look at it and possibly we could do better.
Look, at the last hearing, I agreed that graph needed to be standardised for the increases in area. Absolutely, I agreed with that at the time. And best available science doesn't ever mean you can't improve. Let's not be under any illusion. Best available science doesn't mean you can never improve. Steve, do you want to?
It's overestimate. Could it be potentially overestimating the numbers of kangaroos out there then, Mr. Brill, if it hasn't been factored in, if the additional zones haven't been factored in for, as you suggest, as well as the fact that between 2000 and 2001, there was a change in correction factors to the point that you cannot make comparisons between those 2 years, but this is exactly what the department has done.
Can I defer to Dr. McLeod, please? I think he's going
Dr.
to
McLeod.
give us a much more constructive contribution to this.
I'll unpack a few of the things that you've talked about. The first one is the best available science was at the time that the surveys were taken. So during 1983 up to 2000, the 200-metre strip width was considered to be the best way of estimating kangaroo populations. Subsequent research showed that shortening the strip width to 100 metres improved precision. It didn't have a greater impact on the estimate of the population size itself. It just improved the precision. The switch from going from that to MRDS, remote recapture distance sampling, did the same thing again. We're just improving the precision and accuracy of the counts themselves. To say that you can't compare them from one time to another is not quite correct. They can be compared. I think what is stated in, if that's a quote from the plan itself, I don't think that's quite correct. And there was one more thing I wanted to talk about.
Can I just to jump in on that one,
Yeah.
though? I'm getting that statement from every single quota report. The 2018 I've got in front of me. It's also in the 2021. I looked at this last night, but it's underneath every single estimate of population where you've got from 1997 right through to 2017 or 2020 or 21. You have the asterisks between 2000. Where it actually has minus 14%, a decrease of 14% trend in abundance, percentage change from previous year, minus 14%. Then 2001, it goes 13%, so an increase. But it says invalid comparison due to a change in correction factors and survey strip width. So it says it's an invalid comparison. So an invalid comparison means what, Dr. McLeod? That you can't compare the two figures? And you shouldn't suggest that it was a 13% increase from 2000 to 2001.
No, I would dispute that. I think the uncertainty around that would be greater because you've moved from a 200-metre strip to a 100-metre strip, and you've moved from a less precise method to a more precise method. But I think in a general sense, the trend in the populations will still be correct.
It was a drought as well, I think, in 2000 and 2001. I'll finish on this point, but that was a period of extreme drought, the millennium drought, if we remember, the year 2000. So you had the correction factor, you changed the correction factor, which it says it's invalid, and magically in 2001, the kangaroo population had increased by 13%, when in 2000 it had decreased by 14%, or actually the other, yes, that's right, 14%. During the millennium drought, you changed the correction factor. How can we rely on this chart, this graph that's been relied upon by the industry for 40 years when it's such a, I mean, that's an extraordinary error, if you like, in what has been continued to be produced and is right now before the minister?
The quota is not based, the calculation of all the quotas is not based on this figure. It's not based on this graph. As I said before, each kangaroo management zone is assessed separately, and the trend in the population and the abundance of kangaroos within that zone itself is used to calculate the quota. Combining all the zones gives this nice graphic of the overall trend in the population, but that graph itself is not used in any form to calculate the quota. So I think it's, from what you're saying, I think that's a misinterpretation of how this is used, unless I'm mishearing.
My very last question on this, and then I'll go to Mr. Pearson because I'm doing my last question on this. It's more than just the graph. So it's every single table that I have looked at that says population estimates and trends. I've got one in front of me now. Population estimates and trends in abundance for Western grey kangaroo on the Western Plains, 1997 to 2017. Again in the quota report. So the quota report, I think, is a pretty important document. And in all of these tables, it has from 2000 to 2001 the asterisks that said this is an invalid comparison between these two times. This is in every single table. So the graph is, you said, potentially misleading. It sounds like all of the tables in the quota reports are potentially misleading. Dr. McLeod, would that be correct?
I don't agree with how they've labelled that as an invalid comparison. I don't think that's correct. I think how do we need to interpret this as well is the detections within, and using correction factors tries to account for this. Doing aerial surveys, we don't see everything from the air. Then there are animals that are missed, and this is a consistent phenomenon for every aerial survey. It's particularly for kangaroos. The correction factors themselves are set at a conservative level. They're not considered at a liberal level. So we tend to underestimate what the population sizes were at those times. But that's a limitation of the statistical methods and the methods we have to collect data at those particular times. And as that's improved, we have adopted changes to try to address the issues that which you're pointing out. So at the moment, using mark recapture distance sampling, I'm not aware for broad scale survey that there is any better method for surveying populations over 500,000 square kilometres. There isn't.
Okay, all right. I think we've covered that quite well in the first half of this hearing. Actually, sorry to cut in. We've got less than 10 minutes left. I'll go to Mr. Franklin first from the government, and then Mr. Pearson for a couple more. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. And can I start by thanking you all for being here today? You're all professional scientists and public servants, and I, for one, deeply appreciate the very committed job that you do in this space. It's very clear how much work you do and how genuinely you are committed to trying to deal with this area. And so I just wanted to thank you on that. The second point I wanted to make was I agree with Ms. Sharp that obviously scientific methods are changing, and it's appropriate that you enact those changes in your research. That's absolutely clear. Obviously, some issues have been raised today and previously that you've agreed to address, and that's a good thing too. But hopefully we can all land in a place that is sensible and that we all agree. The question I wanted to ask was back to the animal welfare issues, and you can either answer this now or on notice or a bit of both if you wish, and that's regarding the code of practice or indeed any protocols or procedures around the cull, kangaroo culls, that are focused on achieving the best possible outcomes for animal welfare. I'd be very grateful if you could detail those in depth so that we know. There have obviously been some suggestions, implied and otherwise, that have been made today and in previous hearings. It would help me, and I think this committee, to have a very deep understanding of what the processes, protocols and procedures are that have gone through in order to achieve the best animal welfare outcomes. I don't know who best to address that question to, but whoever's the most appropriate person, possibly Mr. Brill, but it's up to you.
I think given that you've asked for a detailed account, we should take it on notice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's fine, Mr. Brill. I'd be
I
very
think that's
happy.
the most. I think that's the most
It
sensible
sounded like
approach.
a bit of advice as opposed to more of a question, to be honest. As yes, I think taking it on notice is a good thing. Thank you.
I'm very happy with that. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Franklin. We'll be very happy to outline that in a lot more detail for you and get back to you.
Okay, we'll go to questions from Mr. Pearson.
Thank you very much. And just to ensure that that report will also include all aspects in relation to joeys. That's correct, isn't it?
Sure.
Okay. Okay, I just want to go to a question about Tibooburra, which has sort of been haunting this committee, I think, since we started this inquiry. So it's basically about this very confusing situation that happened where it's in the 2021 quota report on page 20, the data from Tibooburra shows that the population of greys was allowed to fall from an estimated 451,594 just to 6,859. Now, when questioned about this, I forget who answered the question, but you said red kangaroos, actually it might have been taken on notice, but anyhow, the answer was, you said red kangaroos in Tibooburra declined from around 1.5 million in 2016 to 344,000 in 2018 as a result of drought during the 2014, 15 and 16 period. So can you explain this answer, given that the Bureau of Meteorology data shows average rainfall in Tibooburra in 2014 and above an average in 2014 and above average rainfall in 15 to 16, with rainfall up 74% to the annual average? Was there a disease, or we just don't know?
Who'd like to take that one? Who, Mr. Brill?
Yeah, look, I'm without seeing the detail of the data that you are referring to, I don't think I can respond directly to the question. I'm not aware of a disease, although there are diseases that exist. We're not aware of a widespread disease that has impacted populations to that extent, and in fact, that's one of the things about the commercial harvesting industry is we actually have 500 people out there with a very keen interest in the health of kangaroos that are looking at kangaroos every night.
Okay, so you'll be able to
we generally find out that very quickly if there is such a thing. Beyond that comment, I'd really have to take it on notice if you can provide the data you're referring to.
So obviously, the answer that was given was incorrect. So it's important we do find out. I'd just like to go to the last point.
No, sorry, I'm not accepting that the answer was incorrect. You've implied the answer is incorrect. Let's see the data for that, and we can respond then.
Oh, so I'm just referring to the weather report.
Sure.
Just in relation to drones, Mr. Quirk, when I was asked about that at the last hearing, in relation to drone, he said, quote, "We have not been offered a technology that would work at that scale." And considering, I think it was Mr. Brill and Mr. Pope, Mr. McLeod, you said that you are always wanting to improve the precision and accuracy of calculating these animals, and drones, we don't even know about the aviation requirements of drones. Well,
No,
I fly
that's absolutely not what I said. What I said is that it's not within the aviation laws in Australia to fly a broad scale out of sight survey. I didn't say out of sight at the time, but that was the implication, to do 500,000 square kilometres of survey across most of New South Wales. It's just not permitted in the New South Wales aviation, in the Australian aviation laws at the current time. So there's lots and lots of both policy and technical development that needs to take place before that could happen.
But the question is, isn't it, that, I mean, if a drone can lawfully fly between 10 meters and 30 meters over an area, as opposed to a fixed winged plane, which is only flying along transects, if you call them, surely a drone getting at 10 meters above the ground with heat sensors, surely that would give a much more accurate count of the animals which we are interested in, wouldn't it? Rather than flying 2 people at a very high level, high height, at a great height, looking out a window.
A couple of things, and then I'm going to go to Dr. McLeod, who uses drones in his research to count kangaroos. Firstly, we don't fly at a great height. We fly at 170 metres above the ground, which is, sorry, I'll let Steve correct that too, because I fear I've mixed up my my units. And it's 6 people in the plane for the fixed wing surveys. It's not 2 people. So, you know, there are some facts that it's important that this committee understands about how the program is conducted and the rigor with which that brings, and the science that we rely on to make sure that it is rigorous. Steve, would you like to comment on your experience with drones?
Sure. I used drones as part of my research, similar to the ones you've described, using thermal imaging and high resolution RGB cameras. On a small scale, they're very good. They work excellently. There are a number of issues. The biggest one is the matter of scale. You can't fly them of the scale to survey 70% of New South Wales in a reasonable amount of time to use them effectively. So Terry mentioned the CASA approval. It can't be flown out of line of sight, so it very restricts from the range they can be used. And also using it. There's also already been a number of tests of using drones, and they're not great for kangaroos at the moment. As technology is developing very rapidly, and we're watching this space because they have the capacity to be a game changer, really. But we're probably a long way from that. I would suspect more than 10 years away from that at the moment. So, as I said, we review the methods. I use drones where they're appropriate. At the moment, the fixed wing survey is the best way of doing the broad scale surveys, and drones are not appropriate. And then I should add that they're not used anywhere in the world across a broad scale survey like that, anywhere.
Okay, thanks, Dr. McLeod. And at that point, at 1 minute past 1, I will thank all of the witnesses for appearing today. I really do appreciate you all being available for the committee members to ask you some further questions. So thank you so much, all of you, for appearing. I do believe there were questions taken on notice. The Secretariat will be in touch with you about those, and you'll have 14 days to respond to those after the Hansard transcript becomes available. So thank you very much. Our live stream, and thank you everybody for tuning in, and our live stream will finish now. Thank you so much. If
Thank
members
you
could
for the
stay
opportunity.
Yeah, thank you on behalf of me and my staff. Really appreciate it. Thank you.